Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about U.S. history generally. Today is March 15, 2026. Exactly 2070 years today, Julius Caesar was assassinated. You know, the Ides of March, it's famously called. 23 senators stabbed Caesar to death. Uh, One of the stab wounds he received to the groin was a blow from uh, Marcus Junius Brutus. And famously, according to William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar said, "E tu Brute." Some people have actually said what Julius Caesar was said was, "And you too, my son." Of course, that's referencing the fact that um Brutus's mother was actually one of Julius Caesar's mistresses. Yes, Brutus's mother had been the mistress of Julius Caesar. Now, of course, Julius Caesar had received warnings prior to this by his wife, Calpurnia. His wife had actually had a nightmare, and she'd warned him, beware the Ides of March. So she told him she had a dream, a nightmare, seeing a statue of him that was bleeding, flowing with blood. And she interpreted it that he was to be killed, was to be assassinated. So she told him not to go to the Senate meeting, that the senators were going to kill him. Um, Initially, he took her advice, right? He initially was going to stay home and not go. But one of the co conspirators, his name was Decimus Brutus, not to be confused with Marcus Junius Brutus, who stabbed him in the groin. Um, but Decimus Brutus reinterpreted the dream and in a different way because he was a co conspirator. So, and persuaded Julius Caesar to actually go to the Senate meeting. And of course, he was stabbed 23 times. And the senators thought that they had liberated uh, Rome from a tyrant because, of course, Julius Caesar had made himself life dictator of Rome, and he was jeopardizing the republic. Right, the Romans were known to hate kings. Right, they'd driven out their kings in 529 BC and established a republic. But now Julius Caesar had made himself um, dictator for life, so he was in king in all but name. Uh, and so now that they had assassinated him, the senators were excited. They ran into the streets, thinking that the mob would be excited, would be happy. However, interestingly, uh, the Mark Antony, who was a relative of Julius Caesar. He was a tribune of the plebs, and he was a was a right hand man of second in command to Julius Caesar. His right hand man. Uh, he would give a very stirring speech, rousing up the crowd, the mob, and eventually the mob were incensed, right? They were incensed and they attacked the senators. They tore one of them from limb to limb, grabbed a hold of one of them and tore him up from limb to limb. So the senators had to flee. They had to flee Rome. They burned the houses of the senators, burned down the Senate building, was known as the Theater of Pompey. They burned it down, and of course, things took a very turbulent turn. Eventually, Rome went into a civil war. Uh, so Cicero was said to have noted in a letter to Atticus on April 44 BC. He said in Latin, I've been trying to learn Latin. In Latin, he said, est factum pulcherimum, sed semifactum. Again, that's sed est factum pulcherimum, sed semifactum. In English, that's but it is a most beautiful deed, yet half done. Of course, that was in reference to the failure to kill Mark Antony, because once Mark Antony stirred up the crowd, he would form the second triumvirate with Julius Caesar's heir. That was his sister's grandson, Octavian. And together with Mark Antony and a third person, Lepidus, one of Caesar's loyal generals, they would form the second triumvirate, and they would defeat Julius Caesar's assassins. They would create a proscription list, and Cicero would fall on that proscription list, and he was assassinated himself. The senators had thought that by killing Caesar, they would be saving the Roman Republic. They would be restoring the Roman Republic from and saving it from a tyrant. However, they didn't bargain that Caesar's heir was just too clever for them. Octavian, who went on to be known as Augustus Caesar, of course, would eventually eliminate his rivals, uh, including Lepidus, and they sidelined Lepidus. But importantly, he got into a civil war and defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, right? And he would go on to consolidate power, and he would become the first emperor of Rome. So the Romans, who hated kings, thought by killing Julius Caesar had killed a potential king and were saving the republic, not knowing that without killing Mark Antony, uh, without killing Mark Antony, he would actually provide the leverage that Julius Caesar's adopted son and heir, that's Octavian, needed to eventually end the republic and create something much stronger than a king, an emperor, the imperator, an emperor who was who commanded kings. That's a supreme monarch, right? The supreme monarch, that's the emperor. And so Octavian, who became Julius Augustus Caesar, he took the name of Julius Caesar. He went by the name Gaius Julius Caesar during his reign. After Caesar was killed, he used the name, he adopted Julius Caesar's name. He commanded Julius Caesar's armies, and he became emperor, the first emperor of Rome. And the rest is history. Of course, Julius Caesar's name became synonymous with emperor, right? Synonymous with emperor. And of course, an emperor is superior to a king. An emperor commands several kings. Augustus shrewdly eliminated all the checks and balances that were in Rome, in the Roman Republic. Of course, our nation, under our founding fathers who loved the classics, they studied the Romans. We tried to copy the checks and balances that were in the Roman Republic. Augustus would eliminate all those checks and balances. He created rubber stamp organizations. He kept the Senate, but all the power was now in the person of Augustus. He became an absolute monarch, right? He was everything, all power was him. The emperor of Rome was now the state. Treason against the person of the emperor of Rome was treason against Rome. So he created a more powerful king, something more powerful than a king. And of course, Julius Caesar's name has become synonymous with emperor today. The Tsar of Russia, right, is a Russianized or Russified version of the Latin Caesar. And of course, the Kaiser, who was the emperor of the German Empire, of course, was also an adaptation of the Latin Caesar's name. So Caesar became the title of the emperors of Rome. In any event, this teaches us some kind of lesson from history that sometimes the best laid plans will not go according to our objective. And this was exactly what happened to the senators who stabbed Julius Caesar 23 times on the Ides of March. As Cicero said est, sed est factum pocerimum, sed semi factum. But it is a beautiful deed, yet half done. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.